Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the One to Know podcast. I'm Joel Haas.
And I'm Lyle Allenstein.
A little bit short staffed today, but glad to have Lyle back with me. Today we'll recap Penn State's Pro Day, some of the top performers from that, and then we'll touch on Penn State's newest commitment and what we saw at Penn State's fourth spring practice that we got a pretty extended look into. But to kick this one off, Lyle, Penn State held its Pro Day. I think the two headliners in Tyler Warren and Abdul Carter didn't participate, which was a little bit disappointing, but a lot of the guys were in action. Who stood out the most to you?
Yeah, I think I do want to start with Tyler Warren and Abdul Carter. Just the stark difference in how they went about Pro Day, because despite them both not participating, Abdul had NFL films following him around. As soon as he walked in, he had swarms of people. His every move, pretty much. Obviously, he came in there with his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, and his parents, both supporting Abdul Carter jerseys, but he was followed everywhere. Today it was announced by NFL that he's going to be on Hey Rookie, which Chop Robinson and Joey Porter were on the past 2 years. And just every single eye was on him, despite not testing. Obviously, it was reported the day before, the day of. It was reported that Tyler Warren wasn't going. But Tyler Warren, in typical Tyler Warren fashion, just kind of blended in and watched his teammates. Obviously, Pat Fryermuth, former tight end, was there. He was seen catching up with him. But other than that, he was just, non-existent. He never really wants to put the attention on him, which wasn't really noted. I think he said he didn't want to do any of his interviews until everyone was done testing for the Penn State contingent that was there. So I just thought that was interesting. But in terms of on-field, I think the biggest winner of the day was Jalen Kimber, who made himself some money. He ran a 4.39 in both his 40s. Vertical jump tested very well. And he talked about, I was in his media scrum, about how he was pissed. That was the word to describe getting snubbed from the NFL Scouting Combine. He felt like he deserved a shot there. He tested on par with a bunch of the guys that were in Indianapolis, and if not, some of the guys that were there, he tested better than. Obviously, Kimber, after spending 5 seasons between Georgia and Florida, he transferred to Penn State one season. He talked about his first media availability last spring. He's like, look, if all goes to plan, he'll be out of there. And I think he made himself some money, boosted his stock. He's a physical corner. Obviously, he started alongside A.J. Harris this year, and he was kind of that veteran guy after they lost Daquan Hardy, Kalen King, Johnny Dixon the year before. So I think he was probably my biggest winner.
Yeah. I thought Julian Fleming was going to do better than he did. We started with the broad jump, and Fleming and Kimber were tied for the farthest broad jump at 10.3. And so when we get to the 40, I'm thinking, obviously broad jump is kind of measuring your leg strength and explosiveness. And I'm thinking, they're probably going to put up some good times. And Fleming ends up running a 4.68. I know there were, rumors coming out of high school that he was in, the mid 4.3s, 4.4 range. Obviously, he had some injuries and had to have, I think, 3 different surgeries throughout his college career, which I think kind of hurt his speed. Kevin Winston's another guy who was impacted by that. He said he used to be in the 4.3s, and after his injury and after his rehab, he hasn't been able to get back to that. He said he ran a 4.44, I believe, post-injury, but his official time on Pro Day, which he got to run twice, and was a 4.50.
Which is still crazy, considering he just partially tore his ACL, 8 months ago?
Yeah, still a respectable time, for sure. Vanover 4.77 was pretty solid. Kozaya at 4.81, at whatever weight he's at, around 300, is pretty impressive. Abdul's parents actually raced each other down the end zone.
Hand fighting.
Mrs. Carter won that one. Yeah, there was some contact there, so I don't know if those times will be official.
Abdul was keeping time, though. And just like he was for, he had a little thing before for the 40s, so maybe after the NFL career, this is what Abdul's got in store for him.
Abdul and his mom playing on the same team, potentially. A little LeBron-Bronny action going on. Scouts were there and definitely took some interest in that, I think.
For sure.
And then Julian Fleming also ran some routes. I thought he looked fine, a little bit slow and sluggish. But, he caught every pass, and it is hard when you're the only receiver, because typically you're going to have 3 or 4 guys running routes and you can rotate through. But when you're the only guy, you're going to get winded because you're just running back and forth. He talked about that. But I had people on Twitter in my comments telling me he should convert to a tight end. He's so slow. And he does have good blocking ability, but I don't know if that's necessarily in the cards.
I think it's hard to evaluate him running routes because obviously he's a great run blocker at the wide receiver position, but like he didn't put enough on tape this year. So it's like it's hard to evaluate that. Obviously at Ohio State, but like he talked about after his freshman year, he was at pro day for Justin Fields when he threw at Ohio State. But like he had Jackson Smith-Njigba running backs, Chris Olave, there was Marvin Harrison Jr. down the road, Emeka Ibuka, who's going this year. Like, because that's what he talked about during his media availability. He's like, part of his journey was the injuries. Part of it was, despite being a number one recruit, 5-star wide receiver, couldn't separate himself in a loaded wide receiver room, and he took a shot at himself at Penn State, and like didn't pay off. Like in terms of production, right? You could talk about the wide receivers and how they didn't do anything, but this is a guy like I don't see a world where he gets drafted. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets to UDFA right after the draft just because of his pedigree. He's a great locker room guy. I think he said he had camp invites with Ravens, Giants, Eagles, or like workouts, not camp invites. So I don't really see a world where he gets drafted, but like NFL, like you've got so many opportunities to get a shot taken on you. So that's that. But I think my biggest winner, other than Jalen Kimber, because I don't really think, regardless, I think people when Fleming went, people were looking at Drew Aller. Like, sorry,
the scouts were just getting some sneak peeks for next year.
But I think other than Kimber, I think my two other winners were. I'm not going to mention Jalen Reed. He didn't run the 40. He did enough damage at the combine. I think I don't really see a reason why he's later than a 3rd-round pick. He had numbers that compared to Caleb Downs, who obviously isn't going to drop a Malachi Starks. Like, no reason he should be later than a 3rd-round pick. My two winners, other than Jalen Kimber, I think were Kozai Izzard and Kobe King. I don't see Izzard getting drafted, but he tested very well, and he talked about like his projections. There's no reason he's not going to get drafted, but I think he did good enough to get a UDFA, which I think probably was on the fence of him. Like he's a great defensive tackle, but he played behind Zane Durant and Devon J. Thomas this year. So but he tested very well. His 4.81 at his 40 was the fastest time of the defensive tackles that were invited to Indianapolis. So I think he could have made himself some money, got a little more attention toward himself. I didn't talk about teams that were interested in him with conversations he had, but he mentioned there were a few. And then Kobe King, I think he had 26 reps on the bench press, which was tied for first among linebackers that were in Indianapolis. And this is obviously you could point at what Kalen King and how his stock plummeted last year. Obviously, they're brothers, and there were a lot of questions about Kobe, if he was going to come back or not. So when he chose not to, everyone obviously brought up the story of his brother. But overall, his numbers were very good, and this is a locker room guy. And he talked about how he got to show off more his coverage abilities during these drills, and that's what teams asked him about. Considering I think it was the Big Ten championship that he kind of struggled in coverage against Oregon, but he also talked about he didn't have a lot of opportunities to really show it off. But I definitely think he's going to get drafted higher than Kalen did. But yeah, those two winners.
Yeah, the Orange Bowl game as well was pretty rough for Kobe in terms of coverage. So he had a 4.63, so I think that kind of helps him in that regard because obviously that's the biggest question is kind of his ability in coverage. And he did show off good speed, and like you mentioned, the 26 bench press reps is impressive. And Penn State football posted the video, and it's not half reps because sometimes guys go to their pro day and their spotter is 2 hands on the bar and they're they're not maxing out or anything like that. But it was 26 legit reps, so would have tied him for most among linebackers. He's obviously got the strength. I don't think that was ever a question. But yeah, I think he definitely helped his stock a little bit at Penn State's pro day. We can move on because Penn State picked up a pretty big commitment here. I think it went a little bit under the radar in terms of buzz. I don't know if people are necessarily talking about it like that. I think just because of where we are in kind of the calendar right now, people aren't really thinking about football maybe, and people didn't make it out to be a big deal. But that I think Khalil Taylor is a huge commitment for Penn State. Class of 2027, so that's kind of another part of this where it's so far down the road that I think it's hard for people to get excited about that. But this is a really talented guy who is a borderline 5-star. He's technically a 4-star right now, but On3 had him as one of the top 30 players in their 2027 rankings. The only reason they don't give him 5-star status is because it's so early in the cycle that they don't have everyone evaluated yet. So it's possible they put some other guys in above him. But regardless, when it's all said and done, he'll be at the very least, top 100, probably top 50. And there's a chance he gets that 5-star status as like a top 30-ish guy. But listed as, or I believe he'll play wide receiver, but is listed as an athlete right now. He's a Pittsburgh guy. I know you were taking a look at his film. What did you see from him?
I mean, he's listed as an athlete. I think he plays safety at Seton LaSalle High School in Pittsburgh. But yeah, this is a really explosive player. I mean, just to start, he's got his huddle tapes, but then he's got one huddle. Obviously, he's going into his junior year. It's 7 minutes just worth of touchdowns. Like, it's absurd. He gets it, punt returns, kick returns. You see him taking handoffs out of the backfield, wide receiver. This is a really good prospect. And for him to, obviously, Penn State, it's 2027, so it's down the road. But for Penn State to kind of get a guy to shut it down this early, that's a big deal because with his, obviously, composite 4-star, still listed as an athlete. So depending on like whatever recruiting service you're looking at, numbers could be skewed, whatever. And then obviously, his stock could go down. But he's a really good player. Seton LaSalle is coming off a really good year this past season, and he was the offense. He was the guy. And I think it also speaks volumes to Terry Smith, his recruiting, what he does in Pittsburgh. It's been a consistent thing over his tenure at Penn State, and this is another big-time target. But that 2027 class, obviously, it's early, right? We're going to both be out of college by the time these guys get to campus. But, like, all top 50 players so far. Khalil Taylor, offensive lineman, Leighton Von Brandt out of Appoquinimink High School in Delaware, who's obviously his teammate of 2026 wide receiver commit, Jasir Rogers. And then Keemon Spell, running back commit out of McKeesport, who him and Messiah Mickens, 2026 running back commit, both, went on record this past weekend and said like they're shutting down their recruitments despite, obviously there was some, not rumors. Messiah Mickens said he was taking OVs to North Carolina, Notre Dame. Obviously, Notre Dame got that offer from J1 Sider. Keemon Spell also got that offer from J1 Sider. But they went on record this weekend. They were on campus for practice, and they said, we're shutting it down. Like, they talked to Stan Drayton, new running backs coach. Like, in their videos that were posted through Happy Valley United, they talked about how they're all on board. They talked to him. He's been committed to them since he's been on the coaching staff. And then they were there, Keemon Spell in his video, he's like, when he was asked about who do you want on board in that 2027 class, he's like, stay tuned. Khalil Taylor commits minutes later. So that's a strong start. I think they have the number 1 recruiting class right now in 2027. So I think, good start. The 2026 class is also off to a great start. I know it's like you look at every 4 years for Penn State. You look at 2018 and you look at that 2022 class. It's like some weird statistic where it's every 4 years Penn State breaks through in that threshold of the elite recruiting classes, basically hovering in like that 10 to 15 range. And like so far it looks like to be on track for that.
Yeah, I think that 27 class specifically could be as good as the 2022 class, maybe even better. And that 2022 class ranked number 6 nationally. It was tied for the highest under James Franklin. I would even argue that it's a little bit underrated when you look at a lot of the names, the guys who are in that class. You obviously have the guys at the top, like Drew Aller, Nick Singleton, Denai Dennis Sutton, were kind of the borderline 5-star guys at the top of that class. But you also had a guy like KJ Winston. You also have
Abdul was a 4-star.
Abdul was in that class. So you had a ton of guys who weren't necessarily at the top of that class who ended up being major contributors to Penn State and still are and will continue to be into next season. And I think this 2027 class, the way it's looking, obviously very early. There's 3 guys in the class, and you referenced the class rankings. Penn State right now sits at number 1 nationally. There are only a few schools that even have commitments in the 2027 cycle, so you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt. But at the end of the day, there's 3 guys who are, borderline top 50 recruits in the country. Like, that's really impressive, especially when you look at the positions they play. You have a left tackle, you've already got a running back, then you've got a guy who can either be wide receiver or safety. But if you're a quarterback who's looking at that class, that's very appealing. Whether that's Peter Borky, who I know Penn State is high on, or
number
whether that's
2
someone
quarterback
else.
in 2027 right now.
Yeah, so, Penn State could land another big quarterback in that class, and they're definitely kind of putting the pieces in place to get someone like that. So I think it's a really good start, and we know Penn State likes to get these classes started early. That 2022 class that we talked about was number 1 in the country for a long stretch. I think that 22 class was ranked number 1 for like 9 months out of the year, and then at the very end started to drop because other schools started to pick up steam. But Penn State likes to get in their guys early. They're also pretty quick to extend offers. A lot of times when you look at a guy's
2029 offer just went out.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of the times, like you can see when these schools are offering guys, and Penn State a lot of the times is the first school or the first power conference school to offer a lot of these guys. So Penn State likes to get in there early. Shout out to them because it's a strategy that clearly works. And there's some good things coming in 2027, but obviously that's a ways away. We can turn our attention more to the now.
That was smooth.
We got an extended view of Penn State's fourth spring practice. So it was our second time watching Penn State practice, and we got a lot of stuff happened. I think the big thing was the one-on-ones. That's what everyone wants to know the most about. And I tried to put out, as many videos of those as I could on Twitter, and those did pretty well. I think a lot of people were interested in seeing that. Now, obviously, you don't want to read too much into one rep because, these guys are going to be going back and forth throughout the entirety of spring and summer and into the fall. And obviously, you don't want to extrapolate from a small sample size, but at the same time, you can see, who's making good plays and who's looking good so far. So who stood out to you the most from practice?
I think we start with the one-on-ones. You talked about not reading too much into it, so I think I'll start with Kyron Hudson. He, obviously, when the media had their viewing portion, he went up against Elliott Washington, A.J. Harris, and Aldavian Collins, and got clamped, all three. And then a lot of people on social media were talking about, is Hudson the guy? Like, is it time to maybe really – are they going to go out and get that third portal receiver because he might not be cutting it? But I would not be too worried about it because A.J. Harris, I think, is going to break that dry streak of Penn State corners not getting selected in round one. I think he's going to first-round pick next year. Obviously, you could point at Joey Porter being like the first pick of the second round. But
he was the first top 32 pick because he was like the number 32 pick or whatever.
So, and then Elliott Washington, Terry Smith and James Franklin both talked about him. Went off talked about his strong winner. 6 for 6 in competitor of the days in a cornerback room that's arguably the strongest position group on Penn State. And then Aldavian Collins he played really well at the end of last year. I've been high on him since I joined this beat in April. So I think those are the three starting cornerbacks that Kyron Hudson went up against. And, it's not like Kyron Hudson hasn't produced in his college career. He's faced good corners. So it's I wouldn't look too much into that. But I do think Aldavian Collins, A.J. Harris, and Elliott Washington, I think those are going to be starting cornerbacks. I think Zakee Wheatley is going to be that safety. And then I think you're going to have Zion Tracy, King Mac, who wasn't at practice. We'll talk about injuries in a second. Battling for that 50B spot. They've talked a lot about how that's going to look in the 4.25. We don't really have exactly traits that they're looking for, but between those two guys and maybe Dejon Lane, I think they're going to be battling for that fifth defensive back spot as of April 2nd when I am talking about where the room stacks up. But yeah, so I think that was my biggest takeaway. I think Lyric Samuel, his one-handed catch was just pretty insane. Obviously, he's not the freshman receiver that's being talked about right now. Obviously, Kobe Howard got buzz starting in winter workouts. Matt Otten looks like a physical specimen out there. He looks really raw, but I think he's put on 15 pounds since he's been here. Route running needs to be cleaned up, but those are the guys that are getting a lot of buzz. I talked to Marcus Hagans yesterday. Kobe Howard is showing up to winter workouts, the first one there for all these freshmen at 5 a.m. Meanwhile, he talked about how Matt Otten is still struggling to get to class on time. So, but it's still early. But those guys look really impressive. But Lyric Samuel, the fact that he went out and did that, I think you got to have a sign of confidence for this receiver room down the road. Obviously, everyone wants to see results right now, and this is what Marcus Hagans' job is really on the line here for, which I wrote about. But I want to go to the injuries before we move on. Deny Dennis Sutton wasn't at practice for the second straight week. Nolan Rucci wasn't at practice. I think Franklin didn't clarify their status, but I think the quote he said was just not available in typical Franklin fashion. So something to keep an eye on there. That defensive end room right now, you're looking at Max, who they're looking for that other starter who's going to be next to Deny between Max Granville and Zariah Fisher, I think. And then you've got the depth pieces, Jalen Harvey, who's another guy, and I White just transferred in for Texas A&M. So it's still early in spring. Bumps and bruises, whatever you want to call it. At the moment, he's not going to say at this point if it's long term. So, but something to keep an eye on. King Ack was not at practice. He had a cast on at Pro Day, so that's also something to keep an eye on as well. But in terms of Rucci's absence, they're down their two right tackles. Kandako has been out with that long-term injury that he suffered during the regular season. Franklin talked about how he's not going to be a full participant at spring ball. I don't even know if we'll see him. But Javen Williams, former 5-star, is holding down that right tackle spot right now. And I think that's interesting because Franklin also was mentioned how he was a swing guy rotating at guard last season, but now he's taking strictly tackle reps. And it's still early. This is practice number 4. This could all be precautionary stuff, but I think it's just something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, Rucci and Donko combined for all 16 starts last year, so that would be big if one or either of them is out.
If true.
That was going to be a pretty tight battle. I think Rucci probably did enough, even though he was the backup to start last season. I think whatever it was 6 starts that he made at the end of the season.
He was the best offensive lineman
I think,
in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think he did enough to kind of hold down that spot, and I think he was the favorite coming into this year. But obviously we haven't seen him, and we have no timeline from Franklin on that. So we could see him next week, and we'll let you guys know if we do, or he could be out for the season. We would never know. Or Franklin would probably tell us if he was out for the season. But regardless, we have no really timeline there. So those are just some guys to watch. I also wonder if maybe J.B. Nelson could kick out to tackle as well, because we know he has that versatility.
Lexi talked to Vega, and JB is starting at left guard right now, and Vega's at right guard.
Interesting.
Yeah. So obviously, I'm sure a lot of people, including myself, Cooper Cousins was probably gonna be that fifth starter, because considering the other 4 guys are returning. But obviously with the injuries, it looks a little different. But JB's a guy
Cooper takes over for Dawkins at center.
Well, yesterday he was taking center reps.
Yeah, he was repping with the first team.
And I think Vega said that Cousins is getting reps. He's cross-training between center, left guard, and right guard. So I find it's hard. Obviously, this is still spring ball. But I think it's going to be really hard. I think Cooper Cousins is better than will be better than Nick Dawkins. But I think it's going to be really hard to take Doc out of that starting lineup.
So how do you take out your 6th-year center?
Captain.
Your captain, and bench him for I guess true sophomore now.
Yeah, but I thought that was interesting. Because he started before.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't discrediting J.B. Nelson. J.B. Nelson's a very good player, but this Penn State offensive line is just so deep. And you look at Cooper Cousins and you're just like, how is this guy not on the field, So I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah. Also, just to clarify, you said you've been high on Davian Collins since April. That's April 2024.
Yes.
April. You've been high on him for a year, not a day.
Yeah, that's true. Sorry, guys.
Just to clarify. That's it for today's episode. Thank you guys for tuning in and watching. We'll be back with you next week with more analysis. But for more football coverage, you can find us at psucollegian.com and follow us on socials.